Hello, my name is Sebastian Arcos. I'm the Associate Director at the Cuban Research Institute in Florida International University. The public demonstrations that we witnessed on Sunday, July 11th in Cuba are completely unprecedented. These were the largest, the most widespread, the most openly anti-regime demonstrations in the history of the Cuban Revolution since 1959. These demonstrations were completely spontaneous, without being influenced, coordinated, or managed by any actors outside Cuba or any of the opposition movements inside Cuba. They were truly spontaneous. They also represented a large cross-section of Cuban society, including men and women, black and white, old and young, but especially young. These demonstrations did not happen in a vacuum. We must move beyond the important factors converging here, such as the deepening economic crisis, a health crisis aggravated by COVID, the growing internet connectivity, and the declining political legitimacy of the regime. Cubans have a long history of resisting the Castro regime. Even in 1959, already Huber Matos, one of the top commanders of Castro's guerrilla army, denounced the Stalinist inclinations of the new regime and served 20 years in jail as a consequence. In the following years, a large underground movement developed in Cuba. In 1961, a group of Cubans landed at the Bay of Pigs with the timid support of the United States, but were defeated despite their bravery in combat. A guerrilla movement in the Escambray Mountains resisted until 1968. Tens of thousands of political prisoners resisted re-education for decades in the worst possible conditions imagined. Castro imposed not an authoritarian regime like Franco or Pinochet, but a totalitarian regime that controlled every corner of Cuban society using policies developed by the Soviet KGB and the East German Stasi. Compared to its peers in Europe, Cuban totalitarianism was extreme in its ideological orthodoxy and the extension of its repressive apparatus. But still, Cubans resisted. In exile, a successful community kept the cause of freedom alive, from the media to the U.S. Congress. Inside Cuba, a small group of former political prisoners led by Ricardo Bofill formed the Cuban Committee for Human Rights with the goal of resisting the regime openly and peacefully using the flag of the universally recognized human rights. By the 1990s, the regime was formally criticized by the UN Human Rights Commission, the only communist country to suffer that humiliation. The internal opposition multiplied, openly and unarmed, inspired by the fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the Soviet Union. In the 1990s, Osvaldo Payá collected thousands of signatures to amend the Constitution, leading to the infamous Black Spring repression of 2002 and his death under suspicious circumstances in 2012. Female relatives of the new political prisoners formed the Ladies in White, who peacefully marched every Sunday for months despite the constant repression and arrests. The opposition expanded to other sectors of society, independent journalists, bloggers, artists, and intellectuals, and they decided to stay in Cuba and fight. The last few years have witnessed a growing number of small and isolated public demonstrations in Cuba, many of them with an increasingly political tone. Last year, state repression against the San Isidro movement, a group of young independent artists and intellectuals, led a group of more than 500 artists to a spontaneous gathering in front of the Ministry of Culture demanding freedom of artistic creation and an end to repression. In solidarity, A group of well-known Cuban musicians made the now famous song, Patria y Vida, a direct challenge to the regime's dark rallying cry of Patria o Muerte. One of the most popular chants repeated by Cubans marching on July 11 was Patria y Vida. The anti-regime demonstrations of Sunday, July 11, represent the latest example of the persistent aspirations of the Cuban people to live in freedom. Cubans will go back into the streets. We just have to wait and see. Thank you.